Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Rausan Pereira. The 28th plenary meeting of the Nuclear Suppliers Group was held in Latvia on the 14th and 15th of June 2018. The NSG took stock of developments since the last meeting in Bern in 2017. In particular, participating governments exchanged information on global proliferation challenges and reiterated their firm support for the full, complete and effective implementation of the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as the cornerstone of the international non-proliferation regime. The group noted that discussions were continuing on the issue of technical, legal and political aspects of the participation of the non-NPT states in the NSG initiated at the 2016 Seoul plenary. At the plenary meeting, the NSG also continued to consider all aspects of the implementation of the 2008 statement on civil nuclear cooperation with India and discuss the NSG relationship with India. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze India's NSG push. Joining me on the program today are Sheel Sharma, former diplomat, Professor Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation, and Pramit Chaudhuri, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Professor Pant, I'd like to begin with you. Let's first try and put into perspective what the NSG is and why is it that we want to gain entry into it.
Well, Nuclear Suppliers Group is one of the four pillars of the new export control regime, part of the global nuclear non-proliferation architecture that I think India has been trying to be part of after the civil nuclear arrangement was signed with the US. And we have seen some great success in terms of the other three legs of this arrangement. So MTCR, Rausan agreement, as well as the Australia group. One by one, we have become members of the three. And I think NSG is probably the most sought after, but also most difficult to get hold of, partly for the reasons that we may come to later. But I think that is an ambition that India has set out for itself, and we have been working consistently towards that goal. In 2016, I think we made the one of the boldest moves towards entering the NSG, and we were not successful. And we have been, since then, we have been trying to keep the momentum going and not to lose the momentum. But I think the fundamental structural realities mean that it's going to be a long haul for us in the sense that, as you pointed out, primarily the discussions continue and we don't know how those discussions will eventually unfold because of the power politics that ultimately will determine the reaction of the NSG, and in particular the role of China becomes very, very critical.
Indeed, the role of China becomes very important, and that's something that we'll discuss ahead in the program. But before that, Ambassador, how would you look at this particular plenary session? I mean, which way do you think it's eventually going to head before the next one later this year?
You know, between 2016 and now, a lot has happened on the non-proliferation scene. And the Nuclear Suppliers Group, though not formally part of the NPT, it does do a lot of spade work for supporting and carrying on with the basic premises of the NPT. So its meeting in that context becomes very important. And fact that we tried our push in 2016 and we made quite a big pitch at that time. So it behoves us to maintain a certain consistency in our efforts. So as part of that efforts, if we have continued with this application, continued to work with the individual members of the NSG quietly, it makes a lot of sense. And those members also should realize, I suppose this is my personal guess, that given the challenges to the international rule-based order, they should look at these things more in the rule-based context rather than realpolitik, because realpolitik and the basics of the international order at times come into conflict with each other. And the bigger challenge for them is to salvage the system. So in that context, to me it appears reasonable for them to look at the text and look at these things and see how export control in the nuclear field is important.
Sure. You know, Pramit Chaudhuri, is 2018 going to be the year?
I doubt it, because as Harsh has pointed out, the same obstacle remains, which is China. That hasn't changed. We haven't seen any evidence that China is softening its stance, which is basically that India cannot join the NSG if Pakistan is going to be left out. And since Pakistan does not have the support of even any of the other NSG members, there's a deadlock. There's nothing's going to happen. So there's no reason to believe that there's any change on that. As Ambassador Sharma correctly pointed out, India does this now will do this every year, launch a campaign to join NSG, largely to maintain the sense that India takes this as an important issue. And those countries which have declared for us need to be reminded and have to be given reasons to why we continue to be there. So in many ways, we're like a person trying to join the membership of a certain elite club. And what we basically do is we know that only one person in that room is opposed to us. So we keep knocking every few months to see whether that person just by chance may have changed their mind or something will have happened. But we also want to remind the other members who supported us that we're still interested. And that will now be a seasonal thing for us until that moment in which circumstances change and allow us to get through. Right now, I don't see that there's any evidence that the circumstances have changed from last year. But remember, when the Indo-US nuclear deal suddenly popped on the scene in 2007, or I can really go back to 2006 in some ways, it was completely unexpected. I mean, 5 years earlier, if you had told the Indian side that the US government, led by its own president, would get us an exemption from all nuclear sanctions that have been imposed on us, they would have laughed at you. And it happened. So we will keep trying, but no, there's no reason, at least I have seen no evidence of any reason why China has changed its mind.
Sure, that having been said, Professor, we've reached out to China, China has reached out to us. There have been a lot of bilaterals between India and China as well over the last 1 year. We've seen that happening. We've seen it happening at the highest level as well. So do you believe that, we could somehow coax China into allowing us or, saying, okay, India can be a part of the NSG?
Well, there has been some hope in some quarters in India that perhaps the recent reset might also reset our equation with China as far as NSG is concerned. I would agree with Pramit. I don't really see a possibility that happening in the short to medium term, because I think the Chinese have played their cards extremely openly. There is no ambiguity about the position they have taken. Initially, the position that they had taken was that non-NPT signing countries should not be there. Then they changed the stance and brought Pakistan equation into it, and I think that extremely complicates the matter, because they are saying criteria-based entry, which basically means that you apply certain criteria to both countries, and if either of the two does not fit in, then there is no possibility of either of the two in getting entry into NSG. So I think that complicates the procedural complication that they have introduced, makes it very difficult to achieve consensus in a body which runs by consensus. So I think while the top leaderships have reached out and there has been some positive momentum in the relationship, I don't see that changing Chinese stance on NSG. And also we should remember that even when in 2016 Prime Minister Modi had reached out directly to the Chinese president about NSG, but it did not yield any positive result. So I don't think that would change Chinese position, given the sort of
our position too hasn't changed as far as CPEC and BRI are concerned.
So we can perfectly go to SCO and declare that we will not be part of BRI. Similarly, they can also say, well, the reset being what it is, we will also not, we will continue to complicate India's entry into NSG. So I don't think there is much is on the horizon in the short to medium term. But I think as others have pointed out, for India it is important to remind others and to remind China as well that look, the non-proliferation game is also changing. So we live in interesting times where Mr. Trump is changing the rules of the game as far as global non-proliferation regime is concerned. He has reneged on his commitment to Iran. He has reached out to North Korea. So the complexity of the global non-proliferation order also means that the Chinese eventually may have to look at the larger picture and take some decisions. I don't know whether I doubt whether that decision is going to be in favor of India, but I think they will have to reconsider their position as far as the global nuclear order is concerned.
Sure. You know, Ambassador, that having been said, as far as the NPT is concerned, why is it that India is opposed to it?
NPT?
Yes.
In circa 2018, we are not opposed to the NPT because we have declared ourselves a nuclear weapon state, and nobody is telling us to accept the most difficult part of the NPT, which we had a problem, which is getting full scope safeguards. Nobody is asking us for that. So rest of the NPT, actually, we've been performing well. You know, we have said it repeatedly that Article 1, 2, 3, you know, we have done better than many who are inside the NPT. So India has no problem. As things stand today, India has no problem with the NPT. India doesn't rail against it. And look at our attitude to Iran, for instance. We have been fully supportive of the nuclear deal with Iran because we want Iran to remain in the NPT. We want Iran to be part of the nuclear mainstream. And the deal seems to assure that. Same way, you saw our response to North Korea. Again, India has positively welcomed the kind of progress which is making. So our attitude to nuclear issues today is highly constructive. And we are not trying to wreck any systems. So, and I think on your point about China also, hopefully our discussions with China could be larger than the transactional or, you know, this kind of a give and take, which is now totally appropriated by another world leader. So if you talk of a longer term perspective, and you find that India and China are on the same side on many of these matters. But, you know, the whole point is that I would frankly say that nuclear proliferation, as we understood it when NPT went into force or last 40 years, today is at a very, you know, very challenging position. It's, if North Korea comes around and accepts some of these conditions, which they've in the past said yes, but went back on it, then there'll be a big push, because then you have a success story. But if this thing remains high-blown rhetoric and you know, media optics, and then they come back with a, you know, a few months down the line with a kind of a damaging reversal to their old tactics, then it'll be a problem.
Sure.
And the experts in this field are more on the side of skepticism than they all welcome this. So I think this non-proliferation business is at a very delicate crossroads.
Right. You know, Pramit, as far as the NSG itself is concerned, you know, India is part of the other three regimes, only the NSG that we are not part of. Why is it that NSG is so important to us, and why do we want to gain entry into it?
Well, I'd say there are three reasons. First, while we have a waiver on NSG sanctions, in theory, it can be reversed. In other words, if the NSG members were to come together for some reason, for example, if we carried out a nuclear test or something that they felt suitably, they could revoke that waiver. So the ultimate guarantee of never having that happen would be to be a full-time, full member of the NSG itself, in which case, as he's mentioned, it's a consensus-driven organization. India automatically can veto any action against itself. It seems unlikely, but it still would obviously be an ultimate goal for India to be part of the high table, if you wish, on that front. Second, on the NSG, we have the NSG still sets in many ways or reflects the rules-making process of the non-proliferation regime at the highest level. So if you're at the table, you can help set those rules or be part of that process or stop rules that you don't like. And the non-proliferation, one of the reasons when we wanted to get that waiver was because the NSG, for example, in terms of the technologies which it was beginning to control, the number of technologies keeps increasing. And it's best, again, if you'd be best to be part of that rules-making process or part of that multilateral process, rather than just be a country outside but have a waiver against some of its actions. Third, and this goes to some degree to the somewhat unique position we have, that we are exempted from NSG, but we are not an NPT signatory, and we are not a CTBT signatory. So this is a slightly unique situation as far as the NSG membership is concerned. The result is, though, however, we are also in a slightly gray legal position. And for example, on the civilian nuclear side, one of the problems we have continued to face is when we go to certain companies or in countries like, let's say, Japan or the United States or Europe, and our companies say, we would like to buy this component or access this technology because we now have an NSG waiver. Their lawyers come in and say, you're in a slightly weird position because our laws don't have a special status for a country like you. So the company will frankly wait for the government to either pass the domestic government concerned to pass a new regulatory process or rewrite the rules to build this new legal status. Otherwise, we're not going to give it to you. And this is a problem that has continued to not a major headache, but it is a problem, especially if we decide to begin to get new reactors in the future from the West. This will be an issue, and it's something that I know the Indian government has been concerned about.
Sure. You know, China's grouse, or China's issue really, Professor, has been that if India is made part of the NSG, then Pakistan too has to be made part of the NSG. But there is an argument, you know, as far as Pakistan being made a member of the NSG is concerned, you know, which says that it's a good thing at the end of the day because Pakistan's nuclear program can be streamlined and there could be checks and balances. Is that a valid argument?
Well, I don't, you know, the argument does not hold much water if you look at the context in which, the context in which Pakistan's nuclear program has operated over the last few years, and the support that Pakistan will be able to generate amongst the community of those of the countries who will eventually decide who to bring on. And I think Pakistan does not really have any support other than China. China also never, before India's case, was not really championing Pakistan's position independently of India. So it was not as if China was saying Pakistan should be brought into the NSG because of streamlining. I think it has taken a peculiar position after first challenging India's position as a non-NPT member state joining, and then combining the two, saying if India comes in, Pakistan should come in too. And I think that is something that we have seen China do for ages now in terms of balancing India with Pakistan. If you recall the whole debate in the initial phase about when the nuclear deal was being negotiated, China made a big deal about it, about Pakistan, and there was, there have been, it went out and made it very clear that if America would be willing to supply nuclear technology to India, it would do so in the case of China, in the case of Pakistan. So I think this balancing that it has done vis-a-vis Pakistan has been one of its long-standing positions of parity between India and Pakistan, and to keep India and to keep looking at India through the prism of South Asia. So, and I think that is very unfortunate in many ways, because it also foreshadows many of the concerns that India has about China's ability to deal with India as a peer, because the lack of recognition that that comes from China, that India is not really a country in the same league. It's a country that has to be eventually dealt with at the level of Pakistan, which I think most of the countries in the rest of the world has acknowledged in many ways India's role, not only as a rising power, but also as a country with very significant nuclear non-proliferation credentials, as I think the ambassador was arguing. This idea that India, despite not being a member of the NPT, has upheld the norms and the rules that underlie the non-proliferation regime very, very strictly. So in that sense, to equate the two, for many in India looks, really a means of realpolitik obstacle being created in the process of India's acceptance into the NSG and the larger nuclear architecture, because that would eventually cement, as Pramit pointed out, India's position in the system as a credible member. So we have seen this back and forth between India and China, and unfortunately China, despite the recent bonhomie, is not really signaling that it is willing to change that position, and that also colors India's reaction towards China in many ways.
Indeed. Ambassador, that having been said, as far as China is concerned, what is the issue really? Does it want to use India's entry into the NSG as a leverage at some point in time to get something out of India, or what is China's problem really?
Our experts who negotiate with China, if you read their books, they they say the Chinese never reveal their cards. What they want, they don't say. They keep asking you to say what are you going to do. And then they might smile or not smile. So given that kind of a negotiating stance that they have, it is very difficult for us to second guess and talk about these things, because it's best left to them. Because if we start talking about these things, what they want, and then second guess, maybe they want this, maybe they want that, this doesn't help the process, in my view. Because
so what's the way around then, Ambassador?
well, the way around is to continue to talk to them, continue to show your credentials. You see, the important point about India is that India doesn't convey any nuisance to any of the members of the NSG. There's no nuisance value that we carry with us. Our credit card has only positive entries. So we have to sort of harp upon them and say, look, they're like, all those who had apprehensions after the Indo-US deal, it is 10 years. There's nothing which has happened which can even for 1% or 10% bear out those apprehensions. India has done nothing of the kind. We are scrupulously observing all those commitments which we gave in the UN, in the CD, or to the NSG. And our nuclear program is continuing to meet our energy needs. It's a different matter that our economy and its need per what you call its energy intensity needs have come down. So even thermal power projects are somewhat languishing. So that need of energy has come down today, but that's because of economic reasons, not because of our penchant for going for clean energy. And given the sustainable development commitments, the climate change commitments, we need to have nuclear energy in a system, in a large measure in the coming 10 years or so to meet the requirement of energy. They will come back in the next tide. Our energy requirements don't go linearly.
Right.
They rise to a point, then suddenly there's a stagnation, and suddenly they come back with next qualitatively higher. So when we need that, by then, if we have nuclear power sufficiently advanced, that will help us.
Sure. Quick closing comment from Pramit Chaudhuri. As far as where is all this headed and what's the way ahead?
Well, I think on NSG, we just have to wait. I think China, from what I've understood, China made it very clear to the Indian side, when the Indian side has pushed them on this, that our concern is that the day you get in, then the door for Pakistan is closed. And as long as that's the case, you're not getting in. So in that situation, there's not really much for India to do until we can potentially persuade China for completely other geopolitical reasons that it makes sense to bring us in. They don't care about a non-proliferation record because they have a terrible non-proliferation record of their own. For them, it's a matter of irrelevance. But at some point, hopefully, we can persuade them. Otherwise, as we've said earlier, because even though we are outside the NSG, it's very unlikely that anything the NSG will do against us. So we will continue to benefit from what we have already accomplished. But this is a long-run game, somewhat like getting a UNSC permanent membership. It's just something you'll have to keep trying and trying. And when the stars are in alignment, you'll get the opportunity. But until for the time being, I wouldn't be holding my breath.
Okay. Wait and watch. When the time is right, you can strike, is what Pramit Chaudhuri is suggesting. On that note, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback and suggestions with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.